It is my pleasure to be with you through these media. And I'm very grateful that this is a possibility. If I could walk out of the camera or the projector and greet every one of you, Your Holiness, Joan Halifax, God bless you, all the people who are there who are going to present, and of course my wife, Eve, I would like to greet you all at this point. So I'm sitting here and I'm asking myself, what can I contribute to such a group that already is so dedicated to the notion of spiritual friendship, of helping people as spiritual directors? Let me tell you a little bit about my history in relation to spiritual direction. I didn't even know what spiritual direction was when I received it. I studied in the Lubavitcher Yeshiva, the seminary of the Chabad Hasidim, dedicated to contemplation. And it was just wonderful to be there. And from time to time I would go to my master, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Joseph Isaac Schneerson. He was the sixth in the chain of Hasidic masters of our school. And I would go to him for spiritual guidance. I would walk into his presence and I would feel such embracing acceptance of who I was and his tuning in to me and to what I needed and to my question. It was very holy and very special. Then from time to time, the counsel that I got from my master, from the Rebbe, I had to learn how to apply it even better. So we had a second echelon, and these people were called mashpiim, influencers. And basically they were the spiritual directors for the school. We studied with them those things that had to do with the spiritual life, about prayer, about contemplation, about a knowing of God, and how to deal with the loving and the unknowing of God. All this was happening in the yeshiva, but I didn't even call it spiritual direction. When I went and worked for my master's degree at Temple University, I was very fortunate. It's a long story and I'm not going to tell it right now, how I met Howard Thurman. But he gave sessions that were called spiritual disciplines and resources with labs. And so we had to enter into those labs when he told us how to, showed us how to experience what we were doing, and there would be wonderful guidance that we received from him. Then I compared that with what I got from the Hasidim, and I saw that they were the same thing. The first time when I was able to reach, when I was moved to reach outside of Judaism, happened to me when I was in 1947 in New Haven, Connecticut, teaching in a Chabad Lubavitch primary school. I wanted to be a better teacher, so I was looking for books on psychology. But then I came into the library and there I saw two books. One was called The Little World Bible by Baloo, and the other one was called Spiritual Disturbances in Mental Prayer by Father Eugene Boylan. Obviously, I wasn't going to leave these books without taking them out. And I found out that the same things that we Hasidim were dealing with, about the inner life and how to make ourselves more transparent to God and open, that these things were already also happening outside of Judaism, and I was wonderfully surprised. And that led me to more of the spiritual direction literature, to the point that I think I read a great deal of what's in Judaism and Christianity, in Islam, in Sufism, in Hinduism, Buddhism, I had in Taoism, I had my periods like a artist has a particular period, a blue period, or this period. I had my period with each one of them. In other words, it was Judaism plus and influenced by the other. And what I learned was that in order to be able to help people, you have to know how to do the inner thing in a way that you can describe it and guide other people too. And those were the kautelas, the wazifas, the eitzot, all these ways in which a spiritual director could help people to do that. Then I start to look back and see what I now had found under the name spiritual direction had existed for quite a long time, going back to the 8th century of the Common Era. And I look at Bachya Ibn Pakuda's book, The Duties of the Heart. What a remarkable book that was, sort of the Jewish Sufi combination. There were some things that were written in Germany about the same time, when the Friends of God were on the Christian side. There were the Hasidim in Regensburg in Germany. And they too asked the question, how do I move from my ought to make what is my ought, my is? How could I do that? And then it was important to also, having learned on oneself to move from rung to rung, they used to speak of that, I would call it today, from attunement to attunement. Then they were able to show other people, and they created a literature. It was about parallel to that literature that was happening with the disciples of Meister Eckhart, and then later on with people like Jacob Böhme, and in England with the Carolines, all those people who were interested in guiding people, what are the inner things that they need to do. The exercises of Loyola, the spiritual exercise. It was wonderful to study that and to try and say, let me try that out and see how does it work. And that was wonderful for me. But in all this, which has to do with the variety and with the expertise and with the knowledge and the subtle distinctions, that wasn't so much important as the issue of encountering the living God. When Howard Thurman asked me the question, using the Hebrew words, don't you trust the Ruach HaKodesh, translate, don't you trust the Holy Spirit? What a shift that question made in me. It was very much like having gotten the zap of a koan. And this is really what the question is. What is the spiritual director trying to do for his friend, for his directee? One of the sisters who was working at the Shalem Institute, that was my next step after having found out about spiritual direction at Boston University School of Theology. I found out that in Washington there was the Shalem Institute for spiritual direction, and I got in touch with them. And once I was working with the staff there, and a nun told me something that has been very strong in my heart. She was saying all of spiritual direction is just to reduce one's resistance to God. Because a personality is created from the way in which we want to present ourselves to other people, first to our parents and then to other people. And what is the self-presentation? What's that all about? That's what the ego is all about. And when I have to say that deeper than that is the breath of life and the awareness that is in me, that's beyond the ego. I have a sense that the whole notion of individuality is what we have to free people from, and I will talk about this some more. When we are a cell of the global brain, as it were, it's a different story. We are connected all the way through and through with everybody. To open oneself to such a wide range, to embrace our brothers and sisters, both those that are human and those that are animals, to embrace life in this way. This is the task for which we have to give our attention. I'm so glad that His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, was speaking about secular ethics, because it's really very important that we start looking at that not from the traditions that insulated us from one another, that were triumphalists, but to be able to say, what is it that is really that word, what you don't want to be done to you, don't do it to someone else, as the basis of it, love thy neighbor as thyself, etc., in all the traditions. When he proposed that, it became clear that our openness to each other and how we have to deal with each other, that this needs healing, and it can be healed if we scrap the notions that we had from before and enter into a new embrace of what is required at this time for the healing of our planet. To be able to understand reality as she would want us to understand it. To build our cosmology from that. And once we have a notion of the cosmology, to learn what are the ethics that derive from that cosmology, which is what His Holiness was talking about. And then we have to go and ask the next question. It's nice to know what we ought to do, but how do we move from the ought to the is, that it becomes our reality? And every one of the paths that we have in our tradition has some wonderful how-tos. They were called upaya, eitzot, kautelas. In each tradition, the counsels of how to go about doing that. And that created a spiritual direction literature that was very, very wonderful. Now, the issue of compassion. Sometimes it's going to feel to us that the person who brings issues to us of prayer and closeness to God is more advanced than we are. And it's true. And then we have to have our empathy go with that person and see what it feels like from them, and to be sensitive to their makeup, to their individuality, so that there isn't one recipe for everybody, but very specific to the person whom we are facing. My doctoral work was called The Yechidut. It came out as a book, Spiritual Intimacy. There I described how the Hasidic master counseled his disciples and what the process was and how he needed to prepare himself to do that. Today I'm very glad that we also have spiritual directors who are women. Sometimes men couldn't get out of the masculine's mind and to give counsel to people that it would really work for the feminine mind. The early people who were being ordained in Judaism very often had to follow a male model as to how to be rabbis. I had the wonderful opportunity of sending my women candidates for the rabbinate to visit Mataji at the Ananda ashram in Cohasset, Gayatri Devi. She was really wonderful, and there was a transmission that these women got about how to be spiritual and not overwhelmingly motherly, and yet to discern what people needed and how to give it. And she did it with a certain elegance and nobility, and I think that's very important, so that women should be able to be those spiritual directors that are needed. There is a problem. Sometimes people come to a spiritual director and what they really need is some psychotherapy first. Bob Hoffman, who was the creator of the Hoffman process, used to say, spirituality is for many people the whipped cream that they put on garbage. You have to make sure that there's no garbage before the whipped cream. Or better, if you go to a dentist, before he puts a filling in, he has to make sure that he has gotten rid of all the decay. I think it's important to know that you can't handle everything, and that you could say to people, this belongs to the other kind of work. When you have done that, please, I'll be ready for you and I'll be glad to guide you. Sometimes it's even necessary to do that before people have reached that. Someone will come and say, I'm in a 12-step program, but I really have trouble to find out how do I deal with the power beyond myself, with the greater power. I think that's sort of roadside help for people that has to happen, to help them to get to the place that they can work with the 12-step program or with the other therapeutical things that they have to do. I want to say that there was something good about the fact that even priests had to go and do confession and receive absolution. I think even the Pope himself has to go to confession and receive absolution. So a spiritual director needs to have a spiritual director. There is a level in which you are not responsible, answerable, if you think that you've got it already. In fact, when you feel that this is how you feel, that you've got it and better, and you know what you need to do without any doubts, then it's really time to go and make an appointment with somebody who can hear you out and open you up again to being visible to God on the inside also. Not everything that all the years in which I have served in that capacity for people can be given over in a short time. And yet I would like to make a mind meld with you. I want to say that all my spiritual and inner files are open source to you. Everyone who taught you and guided you, bring them in to be, at least on the inside, your witnesses to what you are saying and what you're doing and how you're living. But it's even better if you have a live one with whom you can have those conversations that Sufis call sohbet, that of which the Prophet said, then did those who revered the Lord spoke to one another, and God listened to it and wrote it in his book of remembrance to those who respect him and revere his name. So a good friend of that is very important. At the end of the day, it's important to review whom did you see, what did you hear, how much compassion did you send out to that person, and goodwill that they should be able to improve and that all the obstacles should be removed from them. By reflecting on these things, send up a prayer that that person may be able to do what you hope the person would do to become who they have to become. And at the same time, Give thanks for the inspiration that came to you. It's not your own wisdom and your ego that produced it. To lean back and to give thanks. From time to time I wish for you to do a meditation that I call a backstroke meditation. You know the difference when you go swimming like this. This is very directive. The ego is in charge. But when you go like this, it's almost you're giving yourself over to be able to say, I want you to make a reset in me, dear God, that I should be ready, sensitive tomorrow again, and that I should have a night in which that which I'm not conscious of is going to digest what it has to digest of this day. We will have more to say to each other. Don't forget to give blessings. I give you blessings, knowing that behind me, all the way to Father Abraham, stand people who enter into giving you the blessing, that you may become the guides of the people who will heal our planet, the earth.